Welcome to Discovering the Law. My name is Lucy Rivera, and today we have a very special guest. We have the Associate Dean of Boston University Law School, Professor Steve Marks. Professor Steve Marks is a guru in corporations, business formation, mergers and acquisitions, and we are delighted to have this treat. Thank you so much for coming today, Professor Marks.
I'm happy to be here, Lucy.
We are grateful that today we will learn about corporations. And Professor Marks, please tell us, why is it important to organize a business?
Okay, so this is a country of entrepreneurs. You can start a business by just starting a business, by just producing a product and selling it. That is, you don't have to organize at all. That is, you don't have to do anything officially to start a business. However, that said, there are disadvantages to not organizing formally. And the primary disadvantage is in terms of personal liability. So if you just set up a business without doing anything formally, without filing any official papers, and something happens to your business doesn't do well, it goes bankrupt, which means it has more debts than it has assets, for a variety of reasons. Maybe bad luck, maybe it wasn't managed, maybe you guessed wrong in terms of the market, or maybe someone got injured on business property and that created some tort liability. There could be all sorts of reasons why your business doesn't succeed. That is, its liabilities exceed its assets. If you haven't organized officially, your creditors can come after your personal assets. So they can come after that account that you set up for your child to go to college, the money that you put away for that big trip, or anything. So failing to officially organize as some officially recognized entity subjects you to personal liability. And that's something that you like to avoid.
Yes, Professor. On that vein, what does organizing a business mean?
Organizing a business officially means filing papers in order to become an officially recognized organizational form. And the form that most people have heard about is the corporation. So one way to avoid personal liability is to organize as a corporation, to file the papers and to pay the fee that's required for your business to be recognized as a corporation. Doing that prevents your creditor, that is the creditors of the business, from coming after your personal assets.
And so, Professor, please tell us the difference between a business and a corporation.
Okay, so a business is what I described previously. It's basically anyone can form a business. So a business is basically an economic enterprise designed typically to make money. Of course, there's nonprofit businesses as well, yes. But typically organized to make money. So that's what a business is. Now, a business can be organized or can fall under different organizational forms. So if you do nothing but go into business, you will be deemed to be either a sole proprietorship, or if you do it with other people as partners, you will be deemed to be a partnership. So either a sole proprietorship or a partnership. These are the default organizational forms. And as I said before, the problems with these is that if your sole proprietorship or your partnership gets into trouble, the creditors can come after your personal assets.
Yes, Professor.
So what you typically want to do, you want to avoid that. So you're going to throw money and time and effort into the business. You want it to do well, but if it doesn't, you want the business to be able to wrap up, and maybe you try again some other day. That's what bankruptcy is for, to wrap up your business, pay the creditors the best that you can, which won't be 100% because the business didn't do well. And then your personal assets are protected, and someday you can try again. So
Yes.
if you're a partnership or sole proprietorship, of course, the creditors can come after your personal assets. If you file the papers to incorporate, then the creditors can get what they can out of the business, but if the business assets aren't sufficient to satisfy the creditors cannot come after you. They just have to take their loss.
Yes, so on that, particularly about corporations, you did touch upon a corporation and what it is, but describe a little bit more in depth what a corporation is and what are the benefits of having a corporation. You did mention liability, but tell us about what a corporation is and how it works.
Okay, so a corporation is an organizational form that has a couple of characteristics. And you've probably read about these in the news, right? So a corporation has shareholders. So the shareholders are the owners of the corporation. They own the corporation. The shareholders put in place management, who are basically employees of the corporation, but they manage the corporation. And there's also other employees that the business may hire. For small corporations, the owners and the managers and even the employees, they may be all the same people. It could be just one person who basically is the corporation and is the shareholder, is also management, and also does all the work, so is also an employee. So a corporation is an organizational form that basically has shareholders for owners, and it has a board of directors that manages the corporation, and of course, it could have employees.
And talk to us a little bit about the ownership of the corporation, a little bit about the shares. And do corporations, all of them have to have shares? And what does that mean, having a share?
Yeah, you've probably heard of large corporations like Apple and Meta and Microsoft,
Facebook.
Yeah. So those shareholders, they basically, owning shares gives them certain rights. So they get to vote for who the board of directors is. So those shareholders every year vote on who the board of directors is going to be. Those shareholders also get the right to receive dividends. That is, when the corporation makes profits, the board can declare that those profits be distributed to the shareholders, and that distribution is called dividends. Basically, when you own a share of a corporation, you basically get to vote for the board. You get to vote on certain other big decisions, like if the corporation decides to merge or something, there's typically a shareholder vote for that. You typically don't get to manage, but you do get, you're selecting the board, and it's the board that manages. Now, as I said, smaller corporations, the shareholders and the board and the employees, they could all be the same people. And so that distinction, in some senses, disappears. But the shareholders as owners, they cannot be sued for the debts of the corporation. And of course, neither can management and neither can the employees. And so when, for example, a bank lends money to a corporation, they understand that it's not a sure thing, and that corporations do go bankrupt. And they have a diversified portfolio of loans. Some of them work out, some of them don't.
Yes.
But they can't go after the shareholders
Yes.
of the corporation.
And now, for the most serious part and important part of a corporation that everybody suffers with, taxes.
Right. So here's how taxes of a corporation work. And you hear people complain
Yes.
about taxes, and people that run corporations are no different than anyone else. So if you have a standard corporation, which we call a subchapter C corporation, let's suppose that corporation is successful and makes money. that if the corporation makes money, that money they make, the profits, are taxed, corporate tax. Then, when the profits get distributed to the shareholders also have to pay taxes on that. So the profits are in some senses taxed twice. They're taxed when the corporation makes the money, so it's taxed to the corporation, and then it's taxed to the shareholders when the profits are delivered to the shareholders as dividends. So those shareholders have to declare those profits on their personal income tax, and sometimes people call this double taxation. So the profits are taxed twice, one at the corporate level and then one again at the shareholder level.
Oh, interesting. So it sounds expensive. What about flexibility and restrictions for a corporation? Are there any?
Let me contrast this first, okay?
Yes.
So if you decide not to incorporate, you just go into business as a partnership or sole proprietorship, right?
Yes.
We already talked that you're risking because you don't have you're risking because you have personal liability. You don't have limited liability, but tax-wise, you're better off because basically sole proprietorships and partnerships, you're only taxed on the profits once. So for example, when a partnership makes profits, those profits are attributed to the partners, and then the partners pay individual tax on those, but there's no organizational level tax. So the advantages of being a partnership or a sole proprietorship is taxes. Now, let me just say one other thing. For small corporations, there is a IRS designation called Subchapter S. And if you can get this Subchapter S, and that's just for small corporations, corporations that have 100 or fewer shareholders, that are all people, there's a number of restrictions. They all have to be in the U.S. But if you get that designation, then you're taxed like a partnership, effectively. That is, you're taxed on what they call a pass-through basis. So the profits aren't taxed at the organizational level, they're taxed to the individual shareholders. So that's possible for small corporations. And that gives you the advantage of limited liability, because you're still a corporation, with something akin to partnership taxation. So it's sort of a best of both worlds scenario.
That's fascinating. So today we are learning about businesses, incorporation, and the different designations from the Associate Dean of Boston University Law School, Professor Steve Marks, who specializes in all business, mergers and acquisitions, and corporations. My name is Lucy Rivera, and we will continue now learning from Professor Marks. Professor Marks, now could you just tell us, I know you discussed this, the various different forms of business organization. You have been describing a few, but let's take the LLC, for example.
Right. So I've talked to you about the partnership and sole proprietorship. These are those that give they're unlimited liability. So if you do those, you're risking your personal assets. We have the corporation. I talked about that. A more recent organizational form that was developed a number of years ago. I mean, corporations have been around for centuries. This organizational form has been around for decades, so it's more modern. It's called the Limited Liability Company, LLC for short. And the LLC is basically a partnership in which the partners have limited liability.
That's great.
And so, like the Subchapter S corporation, it gives you the advantage, the tax advantages, because you only get the single taxation of a partnership with limited liability that you would get in a corporation. So again, it's an organizational form that gives you sort of the advantages of both worlds. It gives you the single taxation,
the shield,
and the limited liability. Yeah, the shield. So someone starting a small business And the two things they should think about is the two organizational forms that are important. I mean, you should not stay just as a partnership or a sole proprietorship because of the liability implications. So the two things you should think about are the limited liability company or incorporating and getting subchapter S designation from the IRS. Those give you sort of similar advantages. They both give you the advantages of what we call pass-through taxation, that is single taxation, and limited liability. Mm-hmm. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both of those. Mm-hmm. And, but the limited liability company has become very, very popular for small businesses. And so it's something that definitely someone should think about.
And if you are a small business, would you prefer a limited liability incorporation, or would you prefer an S corporation kind of organization?
Okay, so the two forms I'm going to consider are the limited liability company and the subchapter S corporation. Now, I want to emphasize that subchapter S is an IRS designation. So the corporation is like a corporation, like any other corporation, except it has received from the IRS subchapter S status, okay? So
what does that mean?
Well, subchapter S status just means that you get to pass the single taxation.
By the IRS.
Yeah, by the IRS. So you know, corporations are state entities. So if I'm gonna incorporate a small business, I'll do it in Massachusetts, or if I live in California, I'll do it in California. If I'm a national company, then there's a couple of very popular places to incorporate. A lot of national companies incorporate in Delaware, for example, because there's certain advantages to incorporate in there. But if I'm a small business, I will incorporate in the state that I'm going to do business in. Yes. So incorporation is by the state. The IRS is a federal.
Yes,
it's federal, right?
That's the difference.
So if I want to become a subchapter S corporation, I will incorporate in the state that I'm going to do business, and then I will apply to the IRS for subchapter S designation. So that's the one thing. That's one thing you can do. On the other hand, your alternative, if you want similar advantages, is just to form an LLC. And again, that's a state thing, so I would file with the state to form an LLC. And the IRS automatically gives partnership taxation, which means single taxation, to LLC. So you don't have to really file anything with the IRS. If you form an LLC, you get that you get that single taxation. Now, you have to be. You can't start operating like a big corporation. So you can't start if you start. You know, trading your ownership interests. Yes. The IRS at some point will look at it and say, "You look an awful lot like a C corporation, and we're going to tax you like one."
Yes.
But most small businesses don't have to worry about that. They don't trade their ownership interests.
Yes.
So you have these two now. There's, as I said, there's advantages and disadvantages. If you form a corporation, there's a lot more formalities involved in terms of setting up a board and shareholders and all that. Whereas if you form an LLC, there's you know, a lot less formalities. It's like a partnership. You can sort of set it up the way you want to.
And you don't have a board.
And you don't have a board. You can just run it like a partnership.
Do you issue shares with the LLC?
You don't issue shares. You have members.
You have members.
You have members, and you designate who the members are, and you run the LLC like that. So it can be pretty informal as opposed to sort of the formalities of a corporation. And again, if you form a corporation, to get subchapter S designation, there are restrictions. As I said before, you can't have over 100 shareholders. They all have to be people, so they can't be other corporations or,
Yes.
you know, they can be a few other things like trusts and things like that. But there's much more restrictions, whereas there are fewer restrictions on
The LLC.
On the LLC.
Yes.
With both, what the IRS cares about, if you start trading your ownership interests, like trading shares or whatever, they're basically going to tax you like a regular C corporation. So,
I see.
So there's that. But the LLC is much more flexible, which is why it's become, you know, more popular probably than the LLC for small businesses.
Yes. So we only have 4 more minutes, but I am interested in hearing when you say the LLC is more flexible. I would like to hear some of those advantages, but also it just seems an awful lot of work to have that extra step of applying to the IRS to receive an S subchapter corporation designation. What are your comments or thoughts about that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right about that. There's more formalities involved, first of all, with incorporating, and second of all, of applying to the IRS to get the Subchapter S designation. So there's these 2 steps, and even the first step is more complicated than setting up an LLC. That said, setting up a corporation or an LLC these days is pretty easy.
Okay.
You don't even have to show up at the office. You get online, you fill out the information. There's more information with the corporation than with the LLC, but you fill out the information, you get out your credit card, you pay the fee for both these organizations have fees, and then you're either an LLC or you're incorporated. It's become very easy to do. Now, as I said, with both a corporation and an LLC, you do have to keep your things separate, and that's
money.
You have to keep the business stuff with the business and your personal stuff with the personal, or you will lose your limited liability. And that's what you're doing this for.
Yes.
That's the main reason you're doing this for, is to get the limited liability.
So you can pay yourself, but that money doesn't mean it's the money. When you say keep it separate, don't commingle, what do you mean?
I mean, don't use your personal bank account for your business expenses. Don't use your business account for your personal expenses. You can pay yourself as an employee in both these organizations. Let me just say there's some tax advantages for the LLC that we probably don't have, for the Subchapter S Corporation that we probably don't have time to get into now.
Right.
But you know, all this can be done yourself, but let me just say, you're starting a business, it probably pays to get some counsel. And counsel isn't that expensive. Hire a lawyer to help you through this. But you know, you can do it yourself as long as you understand, you know, what the rules are. And again, keeping things separate is the main rule that you have to know.
Excellent. Well, Professor Marks, we learned a lot about how to protect ourselves when we are going into your own business, for all of those entrepreneurs, which there are many these days with online. We want to thank you for being here today. We have a little bit less than a minute, but what are some of your takeaways in a little bit of less than a minute for the audience?
All right, so the primary takeaway is you need to do something. You need to you need to either form a corporation or the LLC. Otherwise, that's the main takeaway, is that you have to protect your personal assets from your business.
Yes.
The second takeaway is basically, once you do so, to run them as separate entities.
Yes.
You must do that, or you're going to lose everything that you hope to gain in terms of your limited liability. And I suppose the third takeaway is, you know, you're going in business, you're going to invest a lot of money in it.